Good evening and welcome to Thai PBS World. I'm Thep Chai Yong with Kun Donyana and Kun Tulip. Good evening, two of you.
Good evening to the special edition of
right.
the Thai PBS World tonight, because today we will focus on only one topic, which is the protest that has been ongoing in Bangkok since the morning, actually since last night.
That's right. This evening, after 3 hours of standoff with the police, the anti-government protester finally broke the last police blockade, and they are now occupying areas around the government house. So that means that practically they seem to have won the first round of battle with the government.
Yeah. Because they finally surrounded all the areas around the government house. And we say that after very long negotiation between the police and the protesters managed to break through and then parade it through the roads and to the government house.
So we have the live feed. That is the scene from areas outside the government house. Of course, the whole complex has been closed since this morning. And the protester managed to surround the whole compound just about an hour ago, after almost 3 hours of a tense standoff with the police.
I know they just get there, but what do you think will make them leave the government house?
They said the protest leaders said that they will, that's what they said, that will occupy the areas for the next few days. But of course, few days, doesn't really, it's a commitment as to how many exact number of days that they will be there. And one of the protest leaders even said that if more people turn up to join the rally, the siege could be longer than a few days.
I think a lot of people feel like they are watching a repeat of the yellow shirt protests when they occupy the government house. But those protesters able to get inside the fence.
That's right. That was, you're talking about the incident back in 2008.
Yes.
When the supporters of the so-called People's Alliance for Democracy, led under the leadership of Kun Sonthi Limkhangkun, of course we remember that, right?
Right.
They occupied the government house. They did occupy, physically.
Yes.
They went inside the government house.
They live in there, they eat in there.
For weeks.
They have
for
some kind of truck and whatnot in there.
But this time around, the protesters said they have no intention of encroaching on the compound. So that's why, at least for the time being anyway, they are confining the activities to areas around the government house and have made no attempts to go in.
But technically, if they stay overnight there, they still violate the law, according to the police briefing this morning.
Yeah. In fact, the whole thing is considered legally illegal by the authorities, because the rally today was something that was unauthorized. They did not seek permission, and the authorities did not grant them any permission to hold a rally. So at the very beginning this morning, police officers were trying to tell the protesters to go home, saying that you are breaking the law, so you are not supposed to be here legally.
And if we all remember last night, where 21 protesters were arrested, there were a few things that the police said that they have breached the law. So one of the arrests were ranging from resisting the police, blocking traffic, illegal assembly, and causing unrest, to violating the Cleanliness Act.
Okay.
And these are the 21 protesters, and these are the charges that have been laid to them.
So what you're seeing now is one of the few tense moments when the police were trying to block the protester from advancing toward the government house. You can see quite clearly that the police, all of them practically, are unarmed.
Yes.
Not even with batons. And once
No
the protest,
shields,
no shields, no anti-riot gears at all. So, and once the protesters started making advance, the police suddenly withdrew and simply allowed them to move forward. And this thing happened repeatedly today, because there were a number of blockades designed to stop the protesters. But once the protesters showed their determination to move on, the police just withdrew.
And we can see that there are a few chaotic scenes throughout the day, and this is one of them. As you can see, all the police are coming across the road
Yeah.
to just to prevent the protesters from heading to the government house.
I think the government is trying their best to not making situation turn violence.
Yeah, I think that's the intention. That's why they easily gave way to the protesters. And even the 4 buses that were parked as part of the blockade were readily removed once the protesters said that they wanted to move forward.
I just don't think the public buses is a good tool to block anyone because people can just walk around it. I think it's better work
It was
with
symbolic,
the
I said.
concrete or
Yeah.
something.
It was symbolic that. All right, so Kun Nat, why don't you take us back to this morning when all the whole thing began, right?
So let's have a look again at how today's protest unfolded. So we'll start from 8 a.m. today. The rally, which is organized by the Khanak Rasadon group, began around this morning, which was much earlier than the initial schedule that was set at 2 p.m. And at that time, there were many protesters already gathered around the Democracy Monument. And to remind you, the 3 key demands of this group are the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, the rewriting of the constitution, and a monarchy reform. The Khanak Rasadon-led protesters were marching from the Democracy Monument to their planned destination at Government House this afternoon prior to a royal motorcade passing along Rashidamneun Avenue to the Temple of the Emerald Buddha. The departure from Rajadamneun Avenue by the protesters will help reduce the likelihood of a confrontation with supporters of the monarchy who plan to gather to greet the royal motorcade. And as for today, there are about 14,000 policemen that have been deployed at the protest site as well as along the Rajadamneun Avenue to prevent any conflict between the opposing groups and to provide security to the motorcade as well. At the same time, police have also been deployed at the entrances and exits of the government house, as well as the buildings called Taikufa and Banshakan 1 as well.
But there was some very bad moment this morning when there was a scuffle between the entire government protesters and some members of loyalist groups that turned out. Of course, I mean, there were minor injuries. Luckily, the police intervened just in time before the situation turned more violent.
And that was the scene around 1 p.m. today where 2 groups were fighting during that time between the anti-government protesters as well as the royalist groups. But then later on in the evening, we can see that the protesters have moved forward towards the government house, which they have been blocked by the policemen trying to prevent them from moving forward to the government house. But it was not until around 5 p.m. where the protesters managed to break through and finally headed to the government house, and right now they are surrounding the area.
And they are setting up the stage now, and they say they're gonna stay overnight.
Okay.
It would be interesting to see how the night unfold again, whether there will be some kind of entertainment like the previous protests that happened in the past or not. But right now, let's take a look at some of the foreign media, how they have been covering the story. Beside the update on the situation, CNN said that this is an unprecedented revolt pits the people against the king. And he talked about in the recent months how this happened, how a new generation of young Thais are openly challenging the institution. And they quote Associate Professor of Politics at Mahidol University, Dr. Panchada Siri Wannabut. She said that she expects that the government will control these protests very hard. And she said, and then they quote Panasaya, which is the person that read the 10 points list of demands in August. Panasaya said that she was almost collapsed many times while she was reading the statements. She couldn't feel her feet and her hands. And she was afraid about the reaction of the crowd on that night, but she finished the statement anyway.
If you look at the headlines, I think it's quite clear that the foreign media see the ongoing conflict within the context of confrontation between the new generation of Thais and the establishment, including the monarchy. So this is how the Western media are seeing the situation unfolding in Thailand. Yeah.
Yes, and CNN also have another quote from Dr. Panchada that she said that these young people, they feel that they have been pushed and they push for change because they don't see their future. And she said that Thailand has not seen this kind of event for 40 years. And young people want to have a say in what's going on in their life. So that's from the report from the CNN. And Al Jazeera said that they try to get some comment from the palace. Of course, there is no comment. I don't think it's usual to get any comment from the palace.
But they did try.
And yes, they did try. It's their standard procedure.
Okay, now that the government house is being surrounded by protesters, now we can see from the pictures that there must be thousands of them now.
Yes.
So the question is, what will happen tomorrow when everyone has to go back to work, including the Prime Minister? Tomorrow, in fact, the Prime Minister, Kun Prayut, is supposed to be meeting a very important dignitaries, Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China.
That would be interesting.
Who arrived today and is scheduled to have a meeting with the Prime Minister at the government house.
I don't assume that the Prime Minister will insist to get in there.
No, of course, certainly not. So the question is where the two will be meeting, and because the meeting is very important. Yeah, the meeting is being touted by the Thai Foreign Ministry as being a very important demonstration of how close the two countries are in economic and political areas. In fact, the Foreign Ministry said that the visit here by Mr. Wang Yi is very important because this year marks the 45th anniversary of the establishment of Thai-Chinese diplomatic relationship. And of course, according to the Foreign Ministry, Mr. Wang Yi will be here to stress the need for the two countries to work closer in all areas, including the fight against the COVID-19.
Definitely.
All right. And so we have to find out where the two will be meeting. And
talking about COVID-19, interesting thing is most of the media doesn't talk about COVID-19 as a cause or any part in this protest, but the diplomat, American media, said that the wave of protest has also been driven by the economic downturn that accompany with the COVID-19 pandemic in Thailand. And they quote the World Bank statistic in the latest economic outlook that Thailand's highly unequal economy is expected to contract by as much as 10.4% this year. So they think that part of the reason that people are so not happy with the government and came out on the street is because of the state of the economy in Thailand right now.
it's interesting because earlier there had been warnings about the need for social distancing and mask wearing for Thais, right? Especially for the would-be protesters. But now that we have seen the anti-government protests going on for weeks now, and today, of course, you don't see any kind of social distancing among the protesters. And I don't think most of them didn't. I don't think most of them wore any masks anyway.
I don't think it's in their mind at all.
But I did see some of the protesters wearing masks during the protest, but based on the footage we've obtained, but yes, we don't see any social distancing at all.
And it can be a super spreader event if there is one person that actually infected with the coronavirus. It will be interesting, but hopefully not. Hopefully that's not going to happen.
So now the biggest question is what will happen from tonight on.
Yes.
Of course, you can expect to hear speeches and entertainments on the stage, but essentially, what would the protester will be demanding? Of course, they stress that they would be reiterating their three basic demands. One is for the Prime Minister, Kun Prayut, to resign. Secondly, for a new constitution to be adopted. And thirdly, they want an end to all harassments of government critics. And of course, one thing that they also tag along is the demand for the royal institution to be reformed. Okay, it would be interesting to hear how they will be expanding on these 3 or 4 demands.
But I don't think the Prime Minister will resign though. I mean, it's just my own judgment. Anyway, BBC actually said that the potential for violence was real. And it quoted the police sources said that they were at their highest threat level. But BBC also said that for the most part, both sides showed great restraint. And the anti-government side was allowed to march unchallenged, which is kind of true. Most of the part, we can see that they're able to move along a little bit by a little bit throughout the day.
They were allowed to go through all the blockades almost unhindered. Basically, it means that police just allowed him to walk through the blockade without any resistance, despite the fact that the authorities and the government have been saying that they will strictly enforce the law, to make sure that nobody break any regulations. But the fact is that these protesters were simply allowed to just march through the blockades without any resistance from the police.
Like you said before, that we don't see any crowd control equipment or gear from the crowd control police. We just only see barbed wires. It's the closest thing to crowd control police tools they're going to use. So they have been pretty, can I use the word compromising?
I think the government has made it quite clear that it has no intention of allowing the situation to go out of control or to become violent. And that's why they have been very meticulous in the way they handle the crowd. Especially today when we saw a large number of people wearing yellow, right? As a symbol of respect and reverence for the monarchy. And there were moments that we were quite concerned that could turn into some kind of a violence. There were scuffles between the protesters and the so-called loyalists. But of course, there were minor injuries, but the police were very quick to intervene, because that only goes to show how careful the authorities are and have been in trying to make sure that no confrontation would develop or escalate into violence.
And the scuffle you're seeing on the screen right now is just one perspective of it, because if you look at social media, many people have shared some footage and video clips of the scuffle with different perspectives. There have been scenes where the royalist groups attacked the anti-government protesters, and also other videos where things have turned other way around, where the anti-government protesters attacked royalist groups as well. So not just the footage you're seeing right now, but on social media we have seen similar things, similar footages like this as well.
We certainly hate to see Thais going against Thai because of their political differences, and we certainly can heave a big sigh of relief that today's events went well and did not result in any serious injuries or any casualties.
That the police office, the police department is actually having a live briefing right now, but we still don't get the summary of what he was saying yet, but we will give you an update a little later after the briefing finish. I think they are talking about what's happening with the protest today.
So in fact, Thailand is still under a state of emergency, right? Because of the coronavirus. So legally, all these protests are illegal.
Yes.
Because you are not supposed to be gathering in public in a group of more than 5 people, right?
Well, the emergency decree is actually for COVID, but it's resembling a lot of political emergency decree though.
And it seems like all the protesters decided to ignore the state of emergency, because for these people, they're having the government meeting these demands is the biggest priority for these protesters.
Okay, so that's the list of the anti-government protest today. And of course, I mean, activity is still going on in front of the government house. And as the protest leaders have said, they intend to hold out, camp out outside the government house at least for the next few days, hoping that their three demands will be met within due time.
We'll see what will make the protester budge. I mean, what will make them maybe slow down or getting softer on their demands. But from my point of view, I don't think the Prime Minister will give in.
No, he has made it clear that even when he was grilled in the House a few weeks ago, that he has no intention to quit because he claimed that he still have a lot of work to do for the country and for the people. So quitting is not something that he certainly has in mind. But who knows? I mean, it also depends on how he can handle the situation.
Right. But at some point, there must be something happen. Otherwise, I mean, they cannot stay in there forever. I don't think the government will let them stay in there forever. So there will be something happen.
And with the protesters, I think the key message for them is, do you hear the people sing? Because if the demands are met, they're definitely not going to stop.
Okay, all right. What else do we have today?
And just so you know, these are the stories we've also been following. Thailand reported 9 new cases of COVID-19 today, who are returnees from India, Japan, South Sudan, and the United Arab Emirates. All of them are now under state quarantine. The new cases brought the total number of infections to 3,652, with no new recoveries nor fatalities. No new infections of COVID-19 have been found so far in Maesot district of Tak province after 3 Myanmar truck drivers were infected. Dr. Thanarak Phalitpat, Deputy Director General of the Disease Control Department, said around 4,000 people in Maesot have been tested for COVID-19, and so far almost half of the test results have been negative. Meanwhile, several residents of Maesot district rallied in front of the second permanent border checkpoint at the foot of the Friendship Bridge, demanding the temporary closure of the checkpoint to prevent the spread of COVID-19 from Myanmar. Leaders of the protest group accused officials of being lax in controlling the arrivals of trucks from Myanmar when 3 Myanmar truckers were infected after their return to the Myawaddy township from Maesot last week.
Despite the tense situation today, there was a light moment that we believe that it's worth leaving it behind for our audience before we sign off tonight.
Right. And it's actually a moment where they have planted some of the trees around the...
They removed the pot plants around the Democracy Monument. For them, it's a symbolic gesture to take back the Democracy Monument.
You know, the pot plants were supposed to prevent them from rallying at the monument.
Right.
But they managed to invade the Democracy Monument.
I wonder where are those pot plants now?
Maybe they keep it to themselves.
And then they moved the pot plants from the areas around the monument onto the roadsides. So it was a lovely scene of today's event then. We leave you with that picture then. And we want to say good night for now. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.